La la la, hey, 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 oh, ay, ay,
Empowered Health, a podcast shedding light on how healing is an inside job. Keys to your inner power and total transformation. Discussing wholeness, wellness, and the effects of the mind on the physical and energetic parts of our being. A podcast to support you, moving from fear and pain into wellness and purpose. Belief, hope, connection, energetic keystones for transformation and inner power. Sacred knowledge that inspires us to look within, to find our own unique path. Empowered Health, release and rewire to become what you truly are, strong, whole, and empowered.
Hi, everyone. This is Jayne and Shel, your naturopathic doctors, here to inspire and support you on your journey.
Today we have with us Ananda More, writer, director, producer of the movie Magic Pills, a documentary intended to prove the validity of homeopathy in healthcare. Ananda is a dedicated homeopath with a degree from the Ontario College of Homeopathic Medicine. Ananda is also a co-owner of Riverdale Homeopathy, a hub for everything homeopathic in North America. Welcome, Ananda.
Ananda, we are so happy to have you here today.
Thank you, Jayne and Shelley. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
So we're going to just start right with asking you, how did you come from being a skeptic of homeopathy to one of the major advocates for this beautiful medicine?
Oh, well, the skepticism was very ingrained for me from university. And I was super, super interested in all kinds of spiritual things, in alternative medicine. And while doing my degree at the University of Alberta, I took a course on witchcraft and the occult. And in that course, we had a textbook titled How to Think About Strange Things. And once I got into homeopathy, I started to realize this was really a course taught from a skeptical perspective. And in that course, we looked at homeopathy. So it's really interesting that homeopathy was grouped in with witchcraft and the occult. And the way I studied homeopathy at that point, it felt so ridiculous. I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of, oh, we're going to give something so diluted, there's nothing in it, and then call that medicine, and we're going to fool a lot of people. And how could anybody be so stupid to believe in something that sounds so foolish? And that's how I walked away from that course, where I was like, oh yeah, witchcraft is so cool, and magic has so many possibilities, and its reverberation and intentions, and I could stand behind things like Reiki and acupuncture and all these other forms of what I think today of as energy medicine. And yet I walked away with homeopathy as utter bullshit. Then when I graduated from university, I went backpacking through India, and I ended up suffering a herniated disc. I ended up in hospital in Varanasi. It affected me for the 10 years after that. There were days I couldn't walk. The pain was excruciating. But while I was in India, everyone, even though I was at the hospital and the hospital was trying to push drugs on me and my insurance company was trying to ship me home to get surgery done and all this stuff, I was saying no to all those things. I already had it in my mind that that wasn't the path that I thought was correct. And yet when all these Indians came to me and said, you must try homeopathy, it's cheap and the best. Like they kept saying that, cheap and best, cheap and best. I was like, you guys are ridiculous. I'm not going to try homeopathy. And I did acupuncture and Reiki and Ayurveda, and I followed everything but homeopathy. And then a few months later, I was in this place called Hampi, traveling with this lovely German girl, and her mother was a homeopath, so she had her homeopathic kit with her everywhere she went. And one morning I woke up super sick, vomiting, diarrhea, the whole thing. And she came to me and said, do you want to try some homeopathy? And I was just thinking to myself, sure, I will try your silly sugar pills and prove to you they don't work. And I took a few pellets. I'm going to guess it was probably arsenicum or veratrum. And I miraculously felt better in about 15 minutes. And as I recovered and I came out, it appeared that there were actually a lot of people in this kind of encampment that we were staying in that were sick. But no one else got better so quickly. People were sick for days. And I went, maybe there really is something to this. Then I went to see a homeopath and had a constitutional case taken. And I was absolutely blown away when this deep depression that I think as miasmatic, which in homeopathic terms means epigenetic, that I inherited from my mother, who inherited from her mother. And I think it had to probably do with the Holocaust. But this state that I had been carrying with me all my life lifted. And sure, I get sad, sure, I have my moments, but that deep, dark depression never returned. And when I underwent that, I was sure that I wanted to follow the same path, and I wanted to help other people in the same way that I had been helped. And at the time, I had written my LSATs, I was starting to apply to law schools, and I thought I wanted to be a human rights lawyer. And that completely changed my path, and off I went to study homeopathy.
Wow.
That's such a beautiful story. And it's so similar to how Jayne and I fell in love with homeopathy too. Like everyone who uses homeopathy has been blown away by its gentle yet extremely powerful healing effects of both the mind, the body, and the spirit.
Yeah, I think very few people come to homeopathy nowadays without having had a personal experience of it. And it really is life-changing. I was thinking the other day how uncivilized so much of our medicine really is when we can compare it to so many natural options out there that are not invasive, that really work with the body and heal so systemically and holistically. And I thought, sitting at the hospital, why aren't we bringing all of this together? Why aren't we enriching our conventional allopathic medicine with these gifts? And it hit me really hard a couple days ago.
Yeah. And yeah, it's such a beautiful, like you said, holistic medicine, and treats the unique person that, we're not all the same. And it really addresses that. And
that makes it difficult sometimes to treat large amounts of people quickly. That can be a limitation, but we've also found in epidemics and the way they use it in India that you can actually treat a lot of people quickly. But it's not the same depth and the same individualization.
Yeah. Yeah, you have a beautiful story from Cuba that we'll get into of treating an epidemic. And just quickly, your story of how could this be, how could it work when there's nothing left? This is the story that is given to so many, but we just had an interview with Carl Moore, and he's a physicist and a homeopath, and he explained quite nicely how it works and how even the dilutions, as it gets more and more diluted, there's a clumping of the molecules. And so it actually becomes more powerful, which is what we as homeopaths believe. So
yeah, they keep telling us that what we're doing is unscientific. And yet when you look at the body of scientific literature, there is so much that could theoretically explain how homeopathy works. And those I think they call them quantum domains, what you're referring to, they also self-replicate. And so there's this aspect of what we do in homeopathy. There's really interesting observations and research that's been done that just putting one remedy next to water or next to the control in a study imbues the water next to it with the same effects that the remedy has been shown to have. And so there's something really interesting about that. I think it's a combination of fields that are and nanoparticles and quantum domains and all of this working together in synergy to have the effect that we're having. It's all explainable scientifically. What's missing is the money and the will to do a lot of this research. And that's what we need. There is such a systemic bias against people doing this kind of research that most people who perhaps even have an interest in it shy away because they're not going to get published. There's a publishing bias. They're going to be ridiculed by their colleagues. And there's just no future in it financially for them as well.
Mm-hmm. And why is that?
We have a really good article on our blog discussing that. So there is the aspect of bias within the medical journals because they really are at the core funded by advertising, and who's advertising in the medical journals? It's the pharmaceutical industry. So should they publish something that will pull funding away from them, they're the losers. You know, we've had editors of two major public medical journals come out publicly and say half of what we publish is bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
And when the whole system right now, what we're calling evidence-based medicine, is so biased and so dependent on where the money lies and who's doing the research, that it's very hard to depend on an evidence base when that evidence base is so flawed.
And manipulated to be, they do a lot of the studies to show an outcome that they want to promote big pharma.
Yeah. Could I talk about the example with the NHMRC report here, for example? So in Australia, the National Health Research, National Health and Medicine Research Commission, something like that, NHMRC, put out a study that basically said that homeopathy is not shown to be effective in any condition. And when that study was pulled apart and really looked at, and it took a team of like 10 people to come to these conclusions because they were obfuscating all their data. The study itself was so poorly done that it wasn't accepted by any peer-reviewed medical journals. And the study, like everything about how it was done was just fraudulent. And it came to this conclusion that homeopathy just doesn't work. And in fact, they really only looked at 5 studies. They claim to have looked at 1,800 studies. They set their standards for a good study so high. No standards like that have ever been used in any scientific research ever before, any clinical research. And they only allowed these 5 studies, which it was like they were cherry picked. They created their standards to cherry pick 5 studies that were negative against homeopathy, except for one. One was very positive, and somehow they ignored in their final report that one of those studies was positive. I think that was Jennifer Jacobs' diarrhea study. So on a freedom of information request to the NHMRC, the Australian Homeopathic Association, and in conjunction with the homeopathic in the UK, and I don't know why I'm blocking out their name right now, HRI, the Homeopathic Research Institute, they learned that the NHMRC had done a previous study that actually showed homeopathy to be effective in 5 different conditions. And that study was buried.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And, you know, we're
yeah,
finding, you know, as naturopathic doctors and seeing the most incredible healing effects of homeopathy over our careers, I know a lot of us are just saying, well, who cares about these scientific studies? Who cares? Because we see it in our daily practices, profound healing results with the homeopathy. And so this beautiful medicine keeps persisting, as we know.
I think we have to care, because this very study has been used to cut funding to homeopathic hospitals in the UK and to take it off the National Health Plan. Yeah. It's been being used to shut down access to homeopathy in countries like Germany, France, where they have been homeopathic hotbeds. It's being used by the FDA to make homeopathy literally illegal. There's a huge battle going on right now in the US to save homeopathy. The FDA created a draft guidance document basically stating that homeopathy needs to go through the new drug approval program, which is hundreds of millions of dollars per remedy. And the whole system doesn't work with individualized medicine. So it's very problematic. And there are groups that have come up and they've created significant obstacles for the FDA in passing this, but they're already starting to act on this guidance when it's still in draft form. So there really are implications when this very faulty research is used to create policy and make homeopathy unavailable to us.
Yeah, it's really a sad situation. And I love what you're doing, Ananda. So this is one of the reasons you became such a strong health choice advocate. And you, for these reasons, also did a movie, Magic Pills. Can you talk about that journey?
Yeah, wow. I thought it was going to be like a 1 or 2 year journey. And next thing I know, it's 10 years and it's still ongoing. It all started when I was at a homeopathic conference here in Toronto, and Dr. Gustavo Bracho, an immunologist from Cuba who works for the Finley Institute, which is a vaccine pharmacy. And he has vaccine patents to his name. He spent his whole life developing vaccines. And then they decided, in an epidemic of this disease called leptospirosis, to try homeopathy because they didn't have enough vaccine for the population, and because the vaccine takes so long to act and requires cold chain transportation and 2 doses over time to really build an immune response. They didn't have that kind of time, and they thought, let's just try this and see what happens. And we tell the story in the film, but they stopped an epidemic in 2 weeks using homeopathy. When he presented this data at the conference, I thought, these are the stories that the public needs to hear and needs to know, and no one's ever going to hear about this. And I thought we need to get this out there, and the best way at the time I could think of was through a film. Let people know what's happening and really get it out there. Also, around the same time, I was interviewed by Toronto Life and by the Walrus, a well-respected magazine here in Canada, a political magazine. And they outright, no holds barred, lied about the research I gave them, about my patients, about what was going on in the world. And I was so angry. These, journals that we think of as very respected and that we trust, The walrus basically said that none of the studies I had given them had ever been published in peer-reviewed journals. When I had given them the photocopies from the peer-reviewed journal, I handed it to them. And when I questioned them on that, the editor left a message behind saying, oh, there's no way they could have been published in peer-reviewed journals because they're not randomized controlled trials. Which, for anyone who understands medical science, we know there isn't just randomized controlled trials. We have many different types of research, which all feed the validity and enrich our knowledge. And there are serious limitations to RCTs. And so we need really rounded research. And these were epidemiological studies. So it occurred to me that we have these editors and these writers, these medical writers, who actually don't know the first thing about medicine. And they're acting as gatekeepers to knowledge and manipulating how the general public thinks about health and wellness and medicine when they don't know the first thing about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that also became really clear with Marketplace, which is a show here in Canada that the CBC does, and it's a consumer watchdog series. And they've done a lot of shows on naturopaths, chiropractors, and they went after homeopaths a couple times. And they did, like, they came and filmed the seminar we hosted with Isaac Golden. And the woman who sat in on the seminar, I thought so much really interesting science was presented. I asked her what she thought, and she said, oh, I don't understand any of the science. It's all over my head. So who is this woman to produce an episode telling people what is science and what isn't, and what is correct and what isn't, when she doesn't have the first clue about any of the information that was presented to her?
Mm-hmm.
That made me really angry, and it opened up the whole world of media and censorship and manipulation and propaganda that is really going on. So yeah, it became a mission to present the other side of the story, and trying to present it without a propaganda bent. So I show both sides of the story. And I've gotten in trouble from some homeopaths who don't like that I present the skeptic's perspective, but I think we need to leave it up to people to go and research and make up their own minds.
Yeah, that's true freedom, right?
What has
Absolutely.
been the feedback from your movie Magic Pills?
Oh, it's so varied. I think from the not homeopathic community, it's been very, very positive. I've even had skeptics come to the film and leave going, yeah, if this is true, I have a lot of research to do and I have a lot to think about. I think people have been worried from the homeopathic community that I'm drawing attention to things like cancer treatment, HIV/AIDS treatment, and disease prevention, which are such massive, important topics. And because we're under fire already so much, that if we draw attention to ourselves in these areas, that we're going to be in trouble. But my perspective is, if people don't know what we do and what homeopathy is capable of, no one's going to care as the FDA and other governments around the world start to shut down access to homeopathy. So to me, that was really important.
Yeah, and you chose 3 big areas that homeopathy's been being used very successfully with, with especially diseases that allopathic medicine struggles with. So the first one you've mentioned in Cuba, where an epidemic was helped with homeopathy really successfully. Like, I think your numbers were that it helped drop cases in the provinces where it was used by 80%.
Yeah, just a little, I think it was 83%, if I remember correctly. And what happened was, it was interesting because there was a control group in Cuba. Hurricanes hit just that East Coast the first year, and they gave people the remedies. The epidemic reduced within 2 weeks. There were almost no cases. The following year, hurricanes hit the entire country of Cuba. And it was one of the worst years on record. And they were able to observe that that intervened area had an 83% around there reduction in cases, and the rest of the country had a over 20% increase in cases.
Yeah.
So it was this beautiful control group. It was very unfortunate in the way that happened, but it gives us so much data, and I think very strong evidence for the effectiveness of homeopathy in that incident.
Yeah, just some background for our listeners. Leptospirosis is a bacteria in the urine of animals. And when a hurricane hits, it gets spread dramatically amongst the people, and a lot of people get sick. So it becomes a very serious situation. Yeah.
Yeah, what happens is it's released into the water when there's stagnant water everywhere, which people can't avoid because everything's flooded. It then transmits into people through even the tiniest abrasion in the skin. And it's hard to diagnose because it looks like dengue. It's very nonspecific, but it has an up to 10% mortality rate, which is quite high. If we look, I mean, right now, I think people are following what's happening with Corona, and we're seeing mortality rates of 0.1 or 0.2%. This is 10%. It's much higher.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another situation that we've been confronted with as homeopaths very recently. And homeopaths all over the world got together and talked about symptoms and remedies that would help, and have been very successful in that situation too, but it's not well known.
Yeah, well, Cuba is a great example because they instituted a homeopathic remedy to deal with corona and with dengue and with a few other viral infections that are running rampant on the island. And right now they have very, very low rates of infection. And you see articles in newspapers like The Guardian talking about what the great mystery of how Cuba has such low incidence, but they're refusing to acknowledge the homeopathy that was put in place there.
Yeah. So yeah, it needs to be better known.
And it seems like we have this very powerful medicine that can help masses of people for very little money. And we just kind of pull our hair out as homeopaths and think, why is it not being used like it was in Cuba, especially during a health pandemic of COVID-19?
Cuba is a unique place in the world because their medical system is not for profit. And it's state run, and their aims have been to keep costs down and keep access free. So there's no massive profit motive. And there was, at the time, things have changed a little bit since Cuba's opened up, but at the time there was no pharma lobbying happening in Cuba. And the Castros, Fidel and I'm forgetting his brother's name, who took his place, and he was also the head of the military, are huge proponents of natural medicine. And the military has developed homeopathy in a way you wouldn't believe there, but it was all kept top secret because it was military operations. They used it in their agricultural practices. It's really incredible what Cuba has managed to do with homeopathy, because it's cheap, it's effective, and those were their goals with medical care.
And it's also extremely easy to take. I mean, you're dropping a pellet onto the tongue and letting it dissolve. Nothing could be easier than that type of medicine.
Yeah.
It can do no harm.
Yeah, they did in Cuba. They then did another intervention in the entire country for H1N1. And H1N1 never really ended up being a problem globally. But what they did discover, looking at their data, that visits to the doctor for upper respiratory tract infections reduced by 100,000 cases that year. And you can get this remedy to millions of people. It went to, I think, 7 million people. You don't need cold chain, you don't need syringes, you don't need any special equipment. It's so easy to disperse widely, and it's probably less than a penny a dose.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so
And
this,
it can't be patented.
right, that's part of the problem.
Well, that's the problem.
Yeah. So this is an example of how you can help an epidemic by giving they often use 1 to 3 or 4 remedies. And sometimes there's a nosode and that kind of thing involved. Now let's move to Africa with Jeremy Sher and Camilla. And I love Camilla's quote on, if homeopathy didn't work, why on earth would she have done it for 20 years very successfully and passionately? I love that quote.
Yeah, I think that's one of the highlights of the film. And she says, why would I be in Africa if this didn't work?
Right.
Because the Shers have really given up their lives, moved their entire families, their children to Tanzania in order to pursue this work that they've been doing, which is absolutely incredible. And they have ended up as the only source of medicine for a lot of people in parts of Africa or Tanzania that are very hard to access, and very, very hard and nobody goes. But they have set up clinics all over the country and they do that.
And what are they treating there, Ananda?
I mean, they're treating everything, but one of their keys is HIV/AIDS. That's one of their areas of focus. Mm-hmm. And again, we are talking, that's a pandemic that we're actually talking about. And what's really beautiful about their work is how many women they work with, how many mothers. And one of the problems in Africa is that these women often contract AIDS from their husbands, and the community blames the women for having given AIDS to their husband. And then they're excommunicated from their tribe, from their community. The husband's family takes everything from them, and they're left to try to raise their children while they're sick themselves. Some of these women can't get out of bed. How do they take care of these young kids, get food on the table? And what Camilla and Jeremy have done is really change the quality of life of these people, where they can get back to work and just take care of their kids. It's incredible. So it's really important work that's going on there.
Yeah, and I love how Jeremy, he talks about how they use it in conjunction with allopathic medicine, but they collect all the data and they can show how CD4 counts have increased over time, and there's weight gain and healthy and all these beautiful things. So you must have seen all of that.
Yeah, I mean, before I went, I remember I met Jeremy at a dinner in Israel, and he was going on about how they have such high success rates. And I just didn't believe the numbers he was giving me. And when I went and sat in on his clinics, it was mind-blowing. I only saw 2 patients who didn't improve, and both of them had done well and regressed after starting anti-amoeba medication. Very specific to that. So it was really interesting. And there's a scene in the film where we follow one of the patients to a hospital, and that's what had happened to her. She got amoebas, was given the anti-amoeba medications, and it antidoted all the homeopathic work that had been done.
Mm-hmm. Right. And she was quite frail, and there was diarrhea involved. So I don't know, Camilla found her in the hospital and helped her. Just amazing. Homeopaths are such beautiful, big-hearted people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to see that was incredible. And I know so this is a little bit different use of homeopathy, because they take each individual and their particular symptoms into account, and and the AIDS and the way it's presenting, and then prescribe a remedy.
Yeah, it's very classical homeopathy. And yet they're able to work quite quickly. There seems to be, what they've discovered is that people in Africa are very present in their bodies, are very attuned with their dreams. And these are things that that enable us to prescribe more quickly and easily.
Mm.
And they seem to be more open, where you don't need as exact a prescription to really be able to affect them in a really positive manner. So it's maybe in some ways might be a little bit easier to prescribe there. And there's been many questions as to why this is the case. But yeah, I think that's helped out a lot. And so they do prescribe quickly, but also Jeremy and Camilla have proven a lot of the remedies they work with. They know that materia medica inside out, and they can prescribe quite accurately very quickly.
And what have you seen with cancer in homeopathy?
So with the film, we went to Calcutta to a very famous homeopathic clinic called the Banerjee Clinic. And they treat thousands of people every year. It's incredible. They have people from all over the subcontinent coming and lining up at their door, like 1,000. These lineups are incredible. 1,000 people camp out overnight in front of the clinic door and wait to get a number the next day to be seen. It's amazing. But this is happening because they're finding a lot of success in treating cancer and treating all kinds of ailments, but they've particularly been very successful with treating brain tumors. And brain tumors have very, very low survival rate when treated with conventional medicine. And the effects of treatments are so horrific because they're on the brain. It's radiation and surgeries being done, and that affects that affects people's cognitive skills and affects them forever, the quality of life. And what they're doing is quite remarkable. They're using 2 homeopathic remedies in combination and having close to 80% success rates. And that doesn't mean that everyone's 100% cured, but it means that either the cancer does not continue to advance or the body completely isolates the tumor, and often there is also a reduction in the size of the tumor. So it's quite incredible.
And those 2 remedies are Calcarea Phos and Ruta?
Yes, but they have to be given in the right potencies and and they need to be done with a practitioner overseeing what's going on. So I worry about people going out and ordering Ruta and Calcarea, not using them properly.
Like all
supervision.
Yeah, like all remedies, it's good to find a homeopathic practitioner and, use the amazing education that they get. And it's quite, again, individualized, and we use a particular potency, a particular remedy in a certain way. So it's important to get that expertise.
So maybe you guys can help me here, because I am biased, and I think homeopathy is probably one of the hardest modalities to practice because it's just so broad and there's so much to know. But you, being naturopaths, have studied all kinds of modalities. What's your experience with homeopathy compared to, I don't know, acupuncture or herbology?
I feel like it's a huge modality in the sense that, the materia medica, for people who are listening, is basically the provings of all of the different medicines or remedies. So a homeopathic doctor has to be familiar with the materia medica to be able to choose the right remedy that matches that patient's picture very, very closely. So there's a lot of knowledge involved. But like with acupuncture, there's over 400 healing points in the body. With herbology, there are so many botanicals on the planet. But, I think with homeopathy too, that as you're studying the materia medica and as you're getting to know your patient on an energetic level based on symptoms, a lot of medicines in that materia medica can be helpful. Mm-hmm. And, we often, especially when we're dealing with traumas, we peel back layers of the onion. So what we see first may not be what we end up treating down the road, and that's okay. Because, when you're dealing with a child or a picture of a case that's very simple, you can often get to it sooner. But some of my most complicated patients with complicated illness, I find unraveling that onion and doing sequential homeopathy to be very effective.
Mm.
Yeah, and I've become a real follower of Divya Shambra because, you know, we take all the physicals into account, but she has a way of bypassing the onion in a way and getting to the subconscious mind. And she talks about how the subconscious mind is connected to everything that happens automatically in our body. So of course, if there's a circuit that's corrupt there, or we constantly get triggered and stressed, you know, by something happening in our life and going into that circuit, eventually it's going to affect the body or the physical, and we're going to come down with a disease. But she goes right into the subconscious and finds the remedy that way, and I find that fascinating. But I find in general that homeopaths should be given great respect, and right now on the planet they're not, and they are the most heartfelt. Like when you go to a homeopath, they really want to see change and deep change, you know, right from the very source of what's happening. So
yeah, I mean, the reason why I say those things, and I haven't studied all these other methods of medicine, I mean, a little bit of herbology, but is the depth of knowledge of that you need to understand, like of the different kingdoms, the different plant families. It's almost like you're studying everything there is to know in the universe to learn how to apply the medicine properly. And then to be able to find that core in the patient at the same time. Like I can work hours sometimes on a case. I mean, some cases are very quick and feel clear and obvious, and other ones you're researching and working for days sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And a good case takes an hour and a half to take because you're, you know, really listening and getting all information. But yeah, it's really intricate and it's a lifelong study.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember people telling me, oh, you don't know anything. Just wait till you've been practicing 10 years. And then I got to 10 years. I was like, I knew nothing. And now I still don't know much. There's so much to know.
So much to know. Yeah. So coming out of magic pills and having had that experience, what take-home message or what can you tell us that you learned the most?
I feel like I got a doctoral degree in filmmaking, but I still don't know much. But what became so clear to me is how much our information that is given to the general public is manipulated, and how much our media, our mainstream media, is really in the hands of the pharmaceutical and medical industry. Even if it's not obvious, like in many countries, advertising dollars don't directly affect, because pharmaceutical advertising is not really legal. It's hidden in so many ways. Like you'll be watching a television show and they'll talk about having to go to the doctor and deal with this thing with a vaccine and that with this. And they're woven into the storylines. The corporations that own all the major media outlets are heavily invested in the pharmaceutical industry. Everything's tied together. And what we end up with is very limited knowledge that's passed on to the population. And I think for me, that's the biggest take home. And what I wanted to give people with this film is for them to go, I hadn't thought of that. And I didn't know that that was possible. And I think I need to do more research for myself, or go try it for myself. That's really the message, the big message I wanted to come across.
It was an extraordinary film. And, you know, I hope that as a society, we begin to recognize that, and even to the basics of teaching anatomy to junior high or high school or elementary children who are sponges, so that they can become aware of their own bodies, so that they can feel like advocates for their own health, and not give all of this knowledge to experts who have one modality, which is big pharma, which are, what we know today as doctors. And I know for myself, before I went to naturopathic medical school, I kind of had a resentment towards my doctors because I didn't realize, like, the word doctor to me is very sacred and very healing and kind of all-knowing. And then when I actually realized that they only study pharmacology as a modality in surgery, I kind of lifted all of those huge expectations I had on doctor. And now I think, okay, well, if I need a pharmaceutical medicine, I will go and see a general practitioner. But if I need medicine, I am going to go and find a homeopath, a naturopath, an acupuncturist, whomever, that I actually feel better, instead of just get prescribed a pill.
Yeah. And I do think there is a benefit from what conventional medicine or allopathic medicine has brought to the world. But I think they're limiting their toolbox, and they're being taught that nothing else is possible. And they're being taught a model that is very material, when we know so little about how our bodies work and what is possible. So, I mean, we have learned so much about diagnostics. We have so many tools that enable us to understand the body in so many different ways, but they're also isolating one specialty from the other. They're not communicating. And you see, I think nowadays, a lot of doctors really rebelling against that model. And they have a lot of really great tools, but we need to be able to work with each other. And that's what, in India, at the homeopathic hospitals, at a lot of them, in charge of every department is an allopath and a homeopath that work together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not seen as a competition. It's not seen as I'm better than you, or you're better than me, or you trying to usurp me, but rather we can work together to support each other.
That would be a beautiful movement for this planet. These things integrated.
And it was the same, the hospitals that Jeremy and Camilla work at, they really, I think the culture there is so different that it's open to natural medicine. And the director of one of the hospitals they worked at was so impressed that he went on to become a homeopath, and they send each other patients. I think all of that is really important.
Mm-hmm. Ananda, we asked this to all of our interviewees. If you were given a diagnosis of a terminal illness and you had 2 years to live, how would you approach it?
I know how I would approach it. I would look for as many natural modalities as possible. I'd be looking at my nutrition and my diet. I'd be looking at the environmental stressors in my life. I would be using homeopathy, and probably like things like SEAC that we talked about if it was a cancer diagnosis. I have in my personal life seen a lot of people go through cancer, go through the chemo and the radiation, and go into remission, and then a few years later come down with another more intense, rapidly growing cancer, for which at that point there's only palliative care available. And I've seen the suffering that people go through when they're undergoing these really invasive, really poisonous treatments. And I don't know if I could put myself through that. So I would be looking for alternatives, definitely.
That's such a good answer.
And to look at everything, right? And to empower yourself with information.
Yes. And the research just never ends, and there's so many incredible people doing such powerful work. If we allowed all of that to come to light, our treatment of cancer and other chronic illnesses would be very, very different.
It's been such a pleasure having you on our podcast today. If people wanted to get in touch with you, Ananda, to possibly have their homeopathic case taken, how would they do that?
So I practice at Riverdale Homeopathy, and I do Zoom work with people on Zoom or other medical telehealth services. So you can book an appointment through Riverdale Homeopathy, and the website's riverdalehomeopathy.com. And if people are interested in watching the film, they can go to magicpillsmovie.com, or it's now available in North America, maybe some of these in other parts of the world, on iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon Prime.
So you can just go to iTunes and search Magic Pills and listen to this amazing movie that gives all kinds of perspective.
Yes. Oh, and it's on YouTube as well. But people do need to be aware that there's another similar film. Oh, my computer's about to die. There's another similar film similarly titled film called The Magic Pill, which came out the same year, and that film is about a keto diet. So just to be able to differentiate the two, this one is called Magic Pills, and it's about homeopathy.
Yes, and the filmmaker is Ananda More.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ananda, so much. I just want to acknowledge the amazing perspective and information you brought forward today. And I'd like to just say to all our listeners out there, don't give away your power to anyone else.
Just go be you.